Hello, 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 and welcome to the Blue Oval Podcast. I am Ben Weissel, and joining me, as always, Garrett Zeilen. How's it going, man?
Well, Ben, every week feels like Christmas because I get to talk with you. I get to
I
talk
don't
with you
believe
every
that
week.
for a second, but I appreciate the sentiment.
You're right. I'm on the naughty list. I lied. That's true. So, we were just talking about this. So, how old is your oldest son now?
He is 2.5. He'll be 3 in April.
3 in April, and so he has like a very vague understanding of what Santa is and Christmas is.
Yeah, like he loves seeing the Santa inflatables out in the front yard. He loves seeing the lights. He likes seeing like the baby Jesus, like those kind of things. Like he's big on all that. He doesn't quite understand the concept of like Santa bringing presents or really the concept of presents in general. He just likes getting things, and
As do I. Yes.
he's pretty pumped about whenever he sees a new toy or not necessarily new clothes. He got some new clothes today, and he was kind of like, "Yeah, that's fine." But the toys part, the toys, the books, whatever. He's pumped about.
I was at the bar last night indulging in some adult sodas, and all of a sudden, we look to our right, and a massive, giant, inflatable gingerbread man just starts coming, like running out, kind of like Saquon when he scores the touchdowns and he like
Yeah, yeah,
swings his
yeah.
arms. It just starts going all around the bar, electric atmosphere, and then it opens up and it's like the smallest girl I've ever seen, and I was like, awesome, love the holidays. So,
That's
so
great.
that's my intro. Yeah,
Speaking of the Eagles, I just made sure because they were trying to give the game away here late. Up
good to see
up
that.
2 as we're recording, 2 minutes left. They have the ball. Okay, we should be good. All right, just making sure that that's fine. All right, let's actually get into some running. But before we do that, we got one new rating on Spotify, up to 178 there. Stayed still on Apple. But today we're going to be talking about a variety of different things. We're going through some of the mailbag questions that you guys sent in. So appreciate everyone who was doing that. But before we get to that, we're going to talk about a distance runner. I repeat, a distance runner winning the Bowerman Award. And that is, of course, Parker Valby, who took home this year's award. If she wasn't going to win it, and the fact that they had two distance runners in there as two of the three nominees, it would have been. I mean, I think we would have revolted.
Yes,
And
we would have
so
revolted.
thrilled to see her take home the win. The other finalist was Oregon thrower Jada Ross, but I mean, 4 NCAA championships, a slew of collegiate records,
I think she
very
has
well
5,
deserving.
right?
Four. Yeah, so 4 outdoor. Yeah, 4 track, and then the cross country. Yeah, so 5 championships. Is that right?
No, it's more. It's actually 6 now because remember she won the 5K in spring 2023, won the cross
Oh
country
yeah, because
national
we're talking.
title,
We're
then 2 indoor, 2 outdoor. So I guess if you're talking about like in reference to the award for this year, what
right.
they're counting
Yeah.
it against, yes,
Right. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So I mean, we've talked about Valby so many times over the last year because every time she touched the track, something incredible was likely to happen. And I think that when we remember this, and this is collective track, this isn't just distance focused, but when we remember this year, Parker Valby is going to be the person that we remember. And I think like that is one of in my mind, should be one of the criteria for this award is if there's someone that's just overwhelmingly better than everyone else in the country, and we just see his or her name at the top of the podium like season after season after season and rewriting the record books, like that is the person who should take home the title. And Valby, I believe they got it correct, and we finally got a distance runner in the top of the Bowerman Awards.
Yeah, I think it's just a very like, what's the competition like this year?
Yeah.
And Jada Ross, don't get me wrong, has been awesome, but it was just pretty definitive that like she was the
Yes.
best track and field runner, period. Whereas last year, I have to ask the question: does Valby win against last year's candidates? So it was, let me go back for those who are wondering. It's Julian Alford of Texas, a
Yeah.
sprinter,
Oof.
Jasmine Moore of Florida. I believe she was a triple jumper, and then Britton Wilson, kind of a 400, 200, 800 kind of dynamic middle distance runner there.
Yeah.
Julian Alford
I
won.
it's close. It would have been close between her and Alfred.
Yeah.
I think Valby still would have deserved to have won, but I think it would have been a little bit tighter. I think it would have been like you would have had an argument either way. I think. Whereas this year, I think it was there wasn't any compelling argument for Valby not winning.
The For those who are wondering, the streak that we're talking about is that the last time a collegiate distance runner won the Bowerman was 2011 by Cam Levins of Southern Utah.
Crazy.
And if you want to count Lauren Rosler, then it's 2014. She's an 800-meter runner. So, like, however you want to define that. But the fact that we have to go back 10 years to even consider someone to like be considered as a distance runner, it just goes to show like how hard it is to win this award as a distance runner.
Yeah.
And again, like I said, I do think it matters on the field, but like that shouldn't take away from her finally breaking through. And now we'll just have to wait another 10 to 15 years for another distance runner to win it.
I mean, the fact that we did have two distance runners in the nominees. When's the last time that's happened? I mean
I mean, that had to be like during the origin of the award, I think.
right. I mean, that's that. I mean, Ramsden was fantastic, and any other year we're talking about her being like gypped for this title because I mean she did everything she could, right? Like she won the NCAA titles that she competed in. She was great in cross country, even though she's a middle distance runner. I mean, she was she. I think she had NCAA records, right? I mean, or
Mm,
no, she was.
who?
Did she beat?
Ramsden?
Yeah,
She had
in the indoor mile, right?
no, she did not have the indoor mile. She was very close. They do have the outdoor DMR though.
Right, that's right. I
That's
forgot about that.
technically true. She's like number 2 all time, I think, in the
Right,
15. Now it depends. It's
behind
like, well,
Jenny
out of
Simpson.
season, collegiate.
Yeah.
Yeah. The last time that there were uh, two finalists that were distance runners on the men's side was, do you count Donovan Brazier?
I I I think so. I think if we're saying 800, I think that's fine.
Yeah, then it was 2016 with Brazier, Darian Lawson, and Ches. And then on the
Okay.
women's side, you go back and I mean, I can't even imagine when the last time that was. Yeah, I did not even know a handful of those latter names, so it's tough for me to say. But congrats to Volby, very
Absolutely.
deserving, not surprising.
Yep. Yeah. So we will wrap the discussion on the Bowerman Award there. But yeah, we always talk about it around this time of the year, and usually we're cranky and mad about it. So we want to make sure that we are giving flowers to Volby, flowers to the Bowerman Award for getting it right.
I'm still
Um,
cranky. Okay,
yeah.
that's I'm still cranky. It took us this long. All right, that's it.
All right, let's go on to the mailbag questions then. Um, First up, we have a question that we got in one of our reviews, I think on Apple a month or so ago, perhaps. And the question was, how do we improve cross country at the professional level? We see all this interest in cross country from the distance community at large for the NCAA season. But when it comes to the professional side, there really isn't that much interest in even like the biggest world championships types of meets. So how can we improve that moving forward?
Did you already have an answer for this, or should I go?
Yeah, I mean, I think we actually have the same answer,
Probably.
and it's just to make it more of a team atmosphere, and I think that's why the NCAA cross country is always super compelling. You have the individual race title races, which are fun and they're great, but if that was all we had, it wouldn't be nearly as exciting. You have those team title races, you have the podium races, you have all these little mini battles
Just
going
national
on.
qualifying.
Right, qualifying, yeah, absolutely. And you have rivalries, you have all these different things that come into the picture because of the individual teams. And when it comes to the professional side, sure, there's like the US or the international, like the US versus Kenya versus Britain versus whoever. But outside of that, there isn't really like it's not like we're talking about OAC going up against Nike's group or something like that. It doesn't have that same feel, and that's largely because of the incentives that all these professional athletes have are geared towards more peaking at the right time for them individually rather than concentrating super hard on a cross country performance all at the same time.
Yeah, and I think just like the what you said more at the tail end there is where I kind of would have chimed in is as saying the the brands, the shoe brands run this sport.
Yep.
Like not a pun, no pun intended. Like they literally run the sport. I mean, in terms of the contracts, the NIL, like the reason why there's so much incentive for people to come run collegiately is because there could be a really good payday if you are exceptional, right? But so the brands are, but the athletes are going to have to operate under how the brands tell them to. And the brands are going to be saying, okay, wait, so you want our athletes to go run in a less popular sport that's
Hmm.
harder to spectate with less money where they can more easily roll their ankle.
Yep.
There's just too many components there. You'd have to have a perfectly curated cross country course. There would need to be a ton of money on the line, so much so to the point where, you're getting people switching teams or creating clubs or whatever it is. It's just there's just not enough incentive right now for all that to happen. And until the sport shifts to a point where the brands don't completely control the athletes, I just don't I don't see that happening.
Yeah, it would take a league coming together that was sponsored by these shoe companies for there to be any kind of traction that would allow the sport to grow. And we've seen the struggle in general that what we've had of just growing track. And I mean the road races, we've seen a lot more progress there than we have even on the track. And to get to cross country, I think that's an even more difficult level to reach. So at the end of the day, it's kind of what we're both hinting at is money, right? The more money that's invested into it, the more likelihood of it being a lot more interesting and being taken more seriously.
Right. And I just don't see that happening. I don't see what the incentive would be for anyone as a backer to be like, we're going all in on cross country. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep. And the Eagles just lost. So I
No, they did not.
spoke far too early.
Oh
So
my gosh, they just lost. Oh, that stinks.
bummer. Oh well. Moving on. Brief Ben sad interlude. All right. Let's go to the next question. Can the NCAA start drug testing athletes? Is this a like do we think they're saying like can they actually start doing this? Like are they allowed to start doing this, or do you think they're saying can they actually like just begin to do this because they haven't in the past?
Well, they do, and they have. It's rare.
Yeah,
It
I was about to say
it
kind of.
They kind of like they do lightly, and this is like my favorite story about testing athletes. Is that back in 2014, was 2015, 2016? Tommy Curtin of Virginia Tech won pre-nationals. He
Hmm.
upset Edward Cheserek in a huge win, huge win. A week later, and I was talking to someone on the team about this, less than a week later after that race, the NCAA said, come here, you're getting drug tested. And so I do think it happens. I think it happens extremely rarely. The question the challenge, however, is again, it goes back to money. The NCAA is not really going to have a ton of incentive to test these athletes if A, the outside institutions and federations are already testing these athletes, and then B, it like what would they gain from doing more testing for a sport that does not produce revenue. Now, if this is a revenue producing sport, then yeah, maybe it's a little
Yeah.
different. Maybe it's like, okay, hey, we got to clean up some things, create some more validity behind what's happening. But yeah, so it happens. I think it's rare. And I don't really know what more I don't see it happening, frankly, anytime
I
soon.
mean, and what are they even testing for? Like, are they especially now with the more advanced like drugs, like EPO and all these other things? Like, to your point, like, are they spending the money on actually tests that would actually that would even be able to
Fair.
assess a lot of these things? Which I mean, it's not like you're seeing distance runners going to be doing HGH or like these like trying to get bigger like kind of supplement like drugs and stuff, which I think is generally what is being tested. Um, so I mean, at the end of the day, I just don't think they care. I think they just want to see great performances. They want to see fast times. I think there's certainly as we and we'll talk about more about this later as we get more and more international athletes,
Beat me
especially
to
from
it.
federations where they're not testing or their anti-doping agencies aren't as strong. I think that starts to introduce some need for it. Whether or not the NCAA recognizes that and cares, I find that difficult to
They
believe,
definitely
honestly.
don't care.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
definitely do not care. But yeah, I mean, it's. I was going to say the same thing as you. I think it could be a greater possibility where everyone starts waving their hands and arms like 20 to 30 years from now, when the NCAA landscape has settled down, when we've established like how this new NIL era works and this new international recruiting era works. Because, like you said, there's going to be federations in countries that just are not as involved or not as established that can't always drug test some of these athletes. And so there's just not the infrastructure there. So I think it might be a while before and there has to be enough evidence of this to happen for people to say like, hey, look what just happened. So Michael Cerrone was a good example. Peter Maru this past
Yep.
earlier this year, past summer.
Yep.
Parvesh Khan was that also this past summer?
Yeah.
Oh man,
And that's what I was just gonna say is I think we are starting to see some evidence that there are athletes that are failing drug tests. It is being caught at a lot more increased frequency over the past year. So again, also as the NCAA just the level that the sport is at increases, these athletes are going to be tested by international federations and by just um, world athletics as a whole too, because they're like if you're running 13 minutes in the 5K, there's a good chance you're going to be racing in events where they're going to be drug testing you,
yeah,
or
Diamond League
and
and yeah,
so we're getting to a point where to be competitive at the NCAA, you have to be running like these world qualifying types of marks, and those come that comes with increased drug testing. So it might honestly solve itself, where it's like, all right, if you're at the top of the NCAA level, you're also going to be running at the top of these international competitions, and it might get weeded out that way. So
and frankly, that's already been the case.
yeah.
With Parvej, at least this earlier this year. But okay, let's move off of that. Women's DMR predictions. What you got?
Whew.
I have a clear favorite in my mind.
Yeah, I think Oregon's got to be the clear favorite in my
Disagree.
mind. Really?
Maybe I shouldn't say clear favorite, but yeah, they're my favorite. It's just fun watching his eyes like scroll across the screen.
I mean, Washington has to be up there.
And they're up there, yeah. Like I'd put them in the contenders, yeah.
I mean, I guess it depends on how much you believe in Providence running
And
everybody, right?
that's my thing. I think they're gonna I think they have too much talent for them not to have an explosively dynamic DMR. I think you could argue that, like, hey, who's Oregon's top duo? Is it Ayeldes and Elmore in the mile leg? I don't know if you want to count like Wilma Nielsen in there. Like, I think Oregon and Washington probably have better, well-rounded DMR
They're
lineups.
deeper. Yeah,
They're deeper, but I think the home run hitters of the 1200-meter leg and the anchor leg are so much stronger. And I think we've seen that, like, you don't have to have a great 800-meter runner to survive. You just need a good enough one.
yeah,
And frankly, Providence, did they? What happened last year at Penn Relays? I think they dropped the baton and there was a weird confusion. And
right.
yeah, but they were just right up there with Washington. So Providence is my favorite, and I'm with you, Oregon and Washington.
Yeah, I mean, Providence was sixth last year, and they did have Flockhart in May running in that, and they did run. I mean, fairly well. I mean, May closed in 429, and I think Flockhart gave them the lead. So they've tried this and it didn't work out great last year, and that was mostly because their 800 leg ran a 212. So
Right.
it's hard to be super competitive when your 800 leg is giving up 5+ seconds to the field. But and that's ultimately why I don't necessarily know they're a clear favorite. I also think they absolutely like, whereas Oregon, they don't even need to run necessarily their top athletes. They just have so many milers that, like, if even if their best runners are running individual events, they can have these fresh 433 runners just ready to go. And I think that with Providence, they're likely not going to be fresh if their top runners are running. And I think for me, I'm going to go with Oregon, Providence 2, and then Washington would be my third.
Is BYU closer to that tier of title contenders or the next best tier?
I think that tier.
Yeah, I
They
agree.
were gonna. I was gonna mention them as kind of like a sneak. Obviously, they're not like sneaky dark horse since they're the reigning champs,
Right. Right.
but they're not. You don't think of them as conversation. Riley Chamberlain obviously put together one of the best anchor legs that you'll ever see, with her 427 performance come from behind
That was
victory.
wild. That was great.
Uh, yeah, yeah, really, really good performance. And we should also mention, I mean, Stanford won two
Yep.
years ago, and
Yep.
they got all the same pieces pretty much. So they absolutely could put together something strong. So I mean, it's going to be a fantastic. The women's DMR over the last couple of years have been a thrill to watch.
Who's your deep, deep sleeper?
Deep, 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 deep. Hmm. Oh, I don't know. I don't like that. Um, Give me Penn State. I don't know
That's your
how
deep,
deep.
deep sleeper?
Yeah, I guess that's not deep.
That's not a deep sleeper.
You go ahead. Let me look up something real
LSU.
quick.
I like LSU. I still think they
That's a
bring
good
back
one.
enough Rangel Beatrice and Rose, and I think the rest of the lineup continues to develop. They showed promise this past fall. I'm not saying that they're going to be all Americans, but like I think I could see them getting to the national stage, and I think it does depend on whether or not Rose, like what leg she runs.
Mhm.
You know, what if she's even going to run in that lineup on the national stage? That's a whole different conversation. But yeah,
I'm what if West Virginia decides to go for it? I don't think they will, but that could, I mean, they're going to be lacking maybe some of the middle legs, but I mean, if Kaylee McCabe's in there, could
well,
be
she was in their
interesting.
lineup last year.
Yeah, and now they got more talent
They do. They do
to
have more
surround
talent.
her.
Yeah.
So, they
Um,
could be interesting.
I'm trying to figure out like their new transfer from Richmond, Madison Trippett. Um, what did she run? Isn't she like more of like a middle distance runner? Did I get that wrong?
That's a good question. Let's take a
She's
look.
run 208, 417, and 443.
Okay.
Yeah, so serviceable.
Yeah, and then, I mean, be interesting to see what Joy No Cut looks like on the track this year. I mean, after everything that she did in cross country, probably not expecting her to run a fantastic DMR kind of leg, but hey, maybe she can give them some stability and maybe the 1200 leg, and puts them in good position to be able to be competitive.
Agreed. Agreed. All right, let's move on to the next one. Which non-nationally competitive XC programs do you see rising in prominence, excuse me, over the next few years? Good question.
Yeah, and I think we both agree that it's probably going to come out of the SEC, right?
Agreed.
Like a
Yep.
a not a team that has not been traditionally competitive, putting a little bit more resources towards the sport. I think LSU is a name that stands out.
Mm,
We've already seen on the women's side them make a lot of progress. They've traditionally been able to develop middle distance runners. Now, if they're putting a little bit more money towards the cross country side of things, I think it's a good coaching staff. I think that they could really make a strong push on both sides, men and women, given a little bit more resources and maybe a couple international recruits, or if they can pick up a couple domestic men or women that they can have for a couple years. I think they're one school that sticks out that I think could make a lot of progress moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, the SEC is certainly one of those schools where one of those conferences where you're going to see a lot coming out of it because the schools want to invest a ton of money for their football programs. And
Mhm.
so, we just saw Georgia sign three different transfers, distance running transfers, who are all like respectable and like not just passive names that you can totally ignore. Now, granted, they still need way, 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 way more to be nationally competitive on the grass, but it's the first sign that they do have money coming in. I mean, I can tell
Mhm.
you for sure, Georgia's eventually going to be a problem. Oklahoma, we're already seeing it with
Yep.
Oklahoma. I mean, Oklahoma just brought in a trio of international names on top of their transfer from Toledo from last year. So it's going to come out of the SEC most likely. And I maybe you look into the Big 12 a little bit. Maybe you look into the Arizona States of the world, the Arizonas. I mean, you're beginning to see some of that international recruiting already taking place there. Um, so yeah, I'd say that those are probably my areas to look at.
Do you think we're going to see Utah with the men's cross country team here soon?
No,
Ah,
no,
bummer.
because
I
I
would love.
think it's actually less likely now.
Hmm, bummer. Yeah, you're probably right. But
They would be so good if they did have a team.
yeah, yeah. That's kind of what I was thinking. I mean, obviously on the women's side they've been good, and yeah, it's a good setup for teams to be able to be very competitive over the distance events. So yeah, that's a shame. I think that would be a fun to see them be more of a rival to like BYU in that aspect and have that rivalry in men's cross country. All right, let's move on. How much fighting is there among analysts over each other's hot takes?
Ben was more writer centric for about
Yeah.
3 years, maybe
Yep.
about, and he has since then come over to the podcast full time. So don't get me wrong, you still work with our rankings, and I texted you the other day. I was like, well, what do you want to do about this name? I think I actually texted you about two names. So, but Ben's not quite as directly involved with the day to day and the different teams as well.
Mhm.
I think I can tell you this: the arguing is not nearly as like prevalent or as intense as like maybe one would suspect. But when there is an argument and we solely believe it, it is a brutal, brutal discussion where we just go in circles for like 30 minutes. Um, so it doesn't happen often, but when it does happen, and it happens across every division, D1, D2,
Mhm.
D3, when that happens, no one's relenting. They're like, I've spent way too much time to be told that this is not the correct ranking. So, yeah.
Yeah, people dig in. I mean, when I was writing and it was kind of a different group of writers back then, there were well, I remember having some very intense conversations. I remember I'm trying to think. I think it was maybe COVID era when we were trying to do the like best runners bracket. Do you
Yeah.
remember when we
Yeah.
were doing that?
April Anarchy. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I was on the phone with a couple writers for 2 plus hours. You weren't even on it. And we
That's
were
wild.
talking forever. And it wasn't like even we were arguing that much, but it was just we were just going back and forth on so many different names. And then and that was only part of that process. And then we talked to you and then we went back and forth with you and so it's for a bunch of track and field and cross country nerds, having someone else who's that interested and that invested in it is like the best thing to be able to just talk their ear off and have someone just not like start nodding off and just like yeah 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 and once they're actually giving you some pushback then you're like oh no I this is really what I believe. So I think everybody just enjoys getting to argue about this because quite frankly we don't get to very much.
Well, I think it's also another reason of like, you have all been so kind to adopt this, like my mentality of how we should analyze and how we
Right.
should talk about this sport, that in doing so you have all like come to agreements of like, well, hey, based on all of our criteria, this and this, like it's straightforward. But then you guys are now so well versed in all of this, all of the writer's guide and all of how we analyze and all the studying, that you'll counter me and I don't have a counter for it. Like usually I'm like, oh, you have to make a better argument than I can for you. And over the last year or two, it's been way more prevalent, which I don't like. Stop it, guys. But so yeah, it happens not often, but when it does, we are stubborn. Very.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you and I have like the same arguments every year about like the same kind of things, and but every once in a while there's a new one that breaks in, and then all of a sudden we're spending 5 to 10 minutes on the podcast over this small little trivial thing that no one probably cares that much about, but we're both very intently focused on making sure that we're the one that's right.
And then I'm going to call you at 4 a.m.
Yeah,
They shouldn't be ranked there, Ben.
yeah,
They
yeah,
shouldn't be
yeah.
ranked there. Hang up. So
So yeah, it's all in good fun. I think everybody does it very respectfully, and we and it ends up being better for the site, better for the podcast in general. Whenever there's arguments, I think so. All right, let's move on. We got a couple coaching related questions that I thought were interesting. Um, and a couple of them were just like, who are the best coaches at developing talent over time? Who are some of the best recruiters? And then this one was interesting to me. If you had a kid yourself, who would you like him or her to attend and which coach to run for? And I think that's a very complicated question. We can touch on that a little bit, but let's start with who do you think some of the best talent developers are in the NCAA?
the names that immediately come to mind are like Lisa Bresnow of Michigan State. I think, when she inherited the direction of that program, there was a handful of seasons where things could have gone south. This past fall was not great, but like prior to that, she had been excellent. I think the Garys at Furman,
Sure.
the fact that they've been able to turn Furman, like no one would have ever thought about Furman 20 years ago as a
Mhm.
team that could be nationally competitive. They're there now. It's also still hard to say like what do we count what weight do we put on for developing versus recruiting. Like developing, I think it's Butler, Matt Rowe. I think he's another great coach when you think about some of the guys that he brings in, and they just like traditionally shouldn't be as competitive as they are, and they've been on a great tear of qualifying for the national meet year after year after year. So um, those are just the first few teams off the top of my head.
The one name that came to mind immediately was Diljit Taylor. I mean that
Yeah,
what you see. I mean, obviously she's bringing in great talent, but the depth and the uh like highest end potential that she's getting out of a lot of these women, I think is super impressive. And it's not like she's coming like bring in like a ton of international recruits or
right.
bring in a lot of like athletes in the transfer. A lot of these women that she's coaching she's had from their freshman year and developed and kept like healthy and strong throughout their career, which I think is very impressive as well. And the other name, again, pains me to say, is Nick Polk of Lipscomb.
Yeah,
I think when you talk about what he's been able to do for that program, and again has gotten some good some talented people in the program, but he has taken them to way higher levels than I think anyone would have expected. You've seen that both on the men and women's side. Women's side, obviously, in cross country has been much stronger, but you've seen it with like Shane Strike
yep.
on the men's side in the 800. Like you've seen the talent development that he's had over the last couple of years. I think is as good as anyone in the country.
Yeah, and I think like everything that you said about Diljit Taylor can largely be applied to Laurie Hennis and Mike
Sure.
Smith. Like the fact that they
Yeah.
just bring them in and they're elite in terms of development. Scott Dahlberg of Wyoming,
Yeah, that's a good one.
he's been having a few seasons like this past fall was that second season where I go, huh, they made it to the national meet. Now, they made it to the national meet a few years back. I think probably 2019 when you and I were still doing the rankings. But
Yeah.
yeah, I like Wyoming and I like what Dahlberg's doing over there. I think it's really hard to try to develop and find kids, and he's doing it.
Lyle Weiss, another name,
Great
Montana
one.
State
Great one.
fits that same kind of mold. as what you're talking about with Wyoming. I mean, the fact that Montana State has been like a staple of like the top echelon, like top 40, top 30 teams on the men's side in cross country and producing national qualifying athletes on the track is just beyond me. Like that's wild. So I think he's absolutely someone that deserves recognition there as well.
And then in terms of best recruiters domestically versus internationally, Darren Gosson, great
Yep.
internationally. Will
Dave
Palmer,
Smith.
Dave Smith. Yeah, like I mean, just the classic like Arkansas of the world, Iowa State, right? Some of those programs do lean on JUCO recruits and transfer portal, but generally speaking, they're probably the better names there. Domestically, I mean, it's probably again the NAU's,
Carlson.
BYU's. Carlson has been great one. Carlson,
Miltonberg.
yep, yep. Miltonberg's another excellent one. I'm trying to figure out like who were the other ones that I guess like Oregon is naturally just going to attract
Yeah.
every like amazing runner. Um, but yeah, no, I
Matt
think that's the group.
Sparks would be another one on domestically from Notre Dame. I think
Yep.
he's done a good job on the women's side, bringing in women. Um, yeah, I think. Trying to think if there's anybody else on here that I would say. I mean, Coach Hennis has done a great job with the portal. I think she's been one
Hmm.
of the most successful with NC State of bringing in and plugging holes. So I
And
think
she doesn't
that
even like heavily recruit out of the portal, anyways. Like she is
no,
actually
she
more
just hits
domestically
home
based.
runs.
Yeah.
She just hits home runs when she does, and I think that is a pretty valuable skill. Uh, yeah. Anybody else for recruiter?
Um, good. I think we're good. I mean, I'm sure we missed a handful of
Yeah.
people that we almost certainly should be shouting out, but for now, no, that's all. That's all I got.
So yeah, the if you had a kid yourself, so obviously I do. Who would you like him or her to attend, and
I
which
have to bypass this question because I talk to too many
I
coaches.
I yeah, and that's fine.
So,
And the way I'm gonna answer it is kind of a cop out, but like I think one of the things, and this is something that I wish I knew before, uh, going into the college scene, and it's hard to know until you've actually gone through it, right, and had the experience. There isn't a one size fits all like
mm,
program or coach for an athlete. So for it, like if either of my sons ends up running, I'm not gonna like just say, oh, no matter what your skill set is or no matter what you're looking for, like you should go run for this coach or run for this program. I think that each program has its own strengths and weaknesses that go with it, and depending on what you're looking for school wise, I think that you have to tailor it. And so I think I, it's easy to say, hey, like go run for Mike Smith. Like clearly he's done a great job developing like at NAU. But I wouldn't say like if you're a middle distance runner who maybe isn't running a ton of mileage and stuff and doesn't do well at altitude, like that's probably not a good solution for you. So I think I mean, again, I'm not gonna say necessarily any one name, but I think that just like people just need to recognize that there's certain pros and cons to each program and try to tailor it to whatever you're good at. And I think you're going to find the most success there rather than just trying to go wherever what everybody else thinks is the best coach or best program.
yeah, and I think that's beautifully put. I was a tour guide at Virginia Tech, and I got asked by a dad one time, like, "I need you right now to sell us on Virginia Tech." I was like, "All right, okay, one of these parents I see," and I said, "No, I'm not going to," because it's all about if this fits you and what
Right.
you need, what your needs are. Like, if this isn't going to be a good experience and doesn't have everything that you're looking for, don't come. Like I'm not going to sit here and plead for it, but I want you to come here if you think it's going to be super beneficial. And so that was kind of my ultimate message, and I think you put it perfectly. But okay, let's move on. I think this is the last one, right?
Yep.
International athletes, the challenges that arise there, and some of the age questions that we have. So, as everyone is aware, or maybe partially aware, the NCAA is beginning to have more and more involvement in international recruiting, meaning, you know, uh, from Europe, from Africa, from Australia. Um, More and more athletes are coming into the higher ranks because in the NIL era, more of these programs can afford to bring in these athletes, right? So, how will this trend continue or accelerate overseas? That's the first part A of this question.
Almost certainly, unless it is stemmed by anything. And one of the questions that was asked as a follow up was, should there be a limit of 2 to 3 international athletes per team? It pointed out that Japan does something similar to that at their collegiate level. And I do think that there is something to the idea of like protecting like domestic scholarship spots and stuff. Like if you look
Hmm.
at the Premier League or any like major soccer league, they have like a quota that you have to hit of a certain amount of like homegrown players, and I think that there is some value to that of protecting scholarship money for uh, like the kids in the United States, that so that they can actually compete, right? And even if they're not running 14 minutes in the 5K as a senior in high school, that they're still going to be able to find a program that's able to give them scholarship money and allow them to develop into an athlete that can compete with the best of the best in the international ranks. So I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I think we are going to see, and we were talking about the SEC schools going to be investing a lot of money. I think we're going to see the ratio of international versus domestic kind of start to move toward the international side a lot more. All that said, I think I said this last week of having the international athletes. I think is a good thing because it pushes the American kids to be better, and we're seeing the Graham Blanks of the world be competitive at the international stage while they're in college because they've been forced to get to that level almost just to be competitive at the NCAA level. And I think there is something to iron sharpens iron, and when you're going up against the best in your collegiate competitions, you're only going to get better. So it's a balance, right? And I also don't want to come across as like xenophobic or like against like, hey, like we don't
Sure.
like we got to protect like our like American runners from these international runners. I certainly don't want to come across like that. But I think there is a balance, right, of making sure that both are able to coexist.
Yeah, for me, it's not necessarily about whether an athlete is international or not. If you're an international athlete and every other international athlete is coming over, you deserve the same rights as they do. Now, what that entails specifically and all the logistics, I don't know. For me specifically, the problem that I have is I don't care if you're American, international, alien. I don't look whatever. Having 28-year-olds be freshmen
Yeah.
is ridiculous. And here's the thing, I don't blame the coaches. I don't blame the athletes. I don't blame any of that because the coaches are being told, "Hey, here's this guy who can basically get you a massive incentive bonus if you win your conference, qualify for the national meet, whatever's listed in your contract. Do you want this guy or gal?" And the coach is never going to be like, "No, we're going to do it from the ground up and it's going to be way harder and we're not going to get nearly as much progress, but thanks anyways." No coach will ever say that. They got to put food on the table. Like that's how this works. It is the NCAA that has let this happen, where 28-year-old freshmen are coming into the NCAA. And I know people have always kind of harped on BYU for their mission trips that they did prior to all this international influx. But again, the missions that BYU does is that they go out there, it's really challenging to train. And while they do physically just develop over time, they come back out of shape. Like, I think we forget about, yeah, all the guys who come back from missions, but then what about the other half that like never came back and were competitive, right? I think those guys it's very easy to forget about the other half there. So
And
for
those
me,
are
it's
2
an
years.
age.
Like, it's 2 years, right? So it's like
Yeah,
at the end of the day, like, okay, yeah, I mean, you throw in a couple red shirts, they could be potentially like 25, 26 as the seniors though. Like that's
right.
and I think that's where you're getting to of like we just there has to be a line. And your point about it being the NCAA's fault is accurate because I mean, you look at this NIL world that we're in, that we're going to be hopefully shifting out of, it's been the wild, wild west because there's no rules. And like it is very hard for like anyone to have any clarity of what is right and wrong because NCAA has provided very little guidance. And so it's like when if we get this settlement through and it becomes more of like a salary cap system, they're still going to need to put together a lot of rules. Like you
Mhm.
think about how far behind the NCAA is in terms of like all these professional sports leagues where there are cap exceptions. There are all these little like just like minutia of like, hey, this is how you like if you
Second apron.
yeah, if you have this contract, it is for this amount of length, and if you like, these are the ways to get out of it, and like the penalties for all these different structures. And I know it's going to take super long time for the NCAA to get to that point, and we might not even want them to get to that point of complexity. But just having a base set of rules, some kind of actual collective bargaining agreement, or and if you want to get away from like having like a union versus like the NCAA
It will
like
happen. It
language.
will eventually
Like,
happen.
yeah, and I agree. I think it will. But even if you don't want to call it like a collective bargaining agreement, something a facsimile of that, right? Where all the athletes, all the coaches, all the administrators are playing on a level playing field because they know what the playing field is, and I think that is what we are sorely lacking at the moment. And again, the incentives are to win. And if there are a million different avenues, the avenue that provides the easiest and most direct way to get to winning is going to be the one that is chosen more often than not.
Yeah,
And that is and that the ambiguity is the biggest issue of all of this, not any particular person or anything like that.
well put. The ambiguity is the issue. I completely agree. And I just want to, put it out there again. When I talk about, the age of international names coming over, I don't want to make a blanket, statement and just saying, well, any, international athlete that comes over, we're just going to assume that they're, super old. I like, who did New Mexico? Ishmael Kipkuri? Like the guy's
Yeah, it
19
was
years old.
19.
He's
Yeah.
He's just as legitimate as any other prep guy that's in high school right now, maybe a year older, whatever. So just something to keep in mind. But yeah, and I can tell you this: we're not the only one in this sport who I think probably have very similar sentiments. So gonna be very interesting.
Yeah, again, it all comes back to let's just have a playing field that everyone can like that is level and like that everybody knows the rules of, right? And I think that is where we are at of just not quite frankly just not having that. So I think all these are things that will get cleared up along the way. How long it takes, I'm not holding my breath on a lot of these things being fixed very, very soon. But I do think that, like you said, there are enough people that care about this and are going to be bringing this up that at some point there will be changes.
Agreed. And on that note, I think we're done. Right? Is that it?
Yep, that was the last one.
Cool. All right. This episode. Oh, is this going to come out on Christmas? It might.
It could.
It could. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to
Yep.
everyone. I assume this is going to come out on Christmas Eve night or Christmas. I have to talk to Wyatt about that. I actually don't know if Wyatt's gone. Um, yeah, I have to talk to him about that. But yeah, so go check out the site. We're doing preseason indoor track distance rankings. Apologies on a little bit of the delay on some of those. That's been just crazy busy with life and whatnot. So go check out the preseason rankings, D1, D2, D3. We're gonna have updated recruit rankings in the coming weeks. We'll do the freshman class rankings. Actually, that's coming up. Shout out to Mara, who I was able to bring back just to help with data collection because she's so
Nice.
good with it. She was great. And I think for now, that is it.
All right. Well, until next week, and I hope you Garrett, and everyone listening has a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays as well. But until next week, I'll talk to you.
I'll talk to you.